This is the Pulitzer on the Road podcast, connecting Pulitzer Prize winners with audiences around the country. I'm your guide, Nicole Carroll. Today, we're sharing a special conversation from the podcast Talk Easy with Sam Fragoso. The show has been around since 2016. Every Sunday, Sam sits for a thoughtful deep dive with an artist, author, or filmmaker. The episode you're about to hear aired just this month. It's an entertaining and insightful talk with Percival Everett, who was named the winner of the 2025 Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. Together, they cover a range of topics, from his immersive process writing James to teaching in the digital age and why he still asks his students to watch Blazing Saddles by Mel Brooks. If you'd like to hear more from Talk Easy, you can visit talkeasypod.com or search Talk Easy wherever you podcast. And now here's Sam Fragoso with Percival Everett.
This is Talk Easy. I'm Sam Fragoso. Welcome to the show. Today, writer Percival Everett. He's the author of more than 30 books across fiction, poetry, and criticism. A feat that is so impressive that I'm tired just saying it. He's also the recent recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for his latest novel, James, a funny and bold reimagining of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but this time told from Jim's perspective. Of course, Twain's Southern classic follows Huck and Jim down the Mississippi, or at least that's how I remember it, reading it as a kid. But a few years back, while Percival was rereading the book, he kept running into the same questions. What happens when Huck isn't with Jim? What does freedom mean when you're seen as someone else's property? And so, in the absence of answers from Twain, Everett produced James. For those unfamiliar, Everett has been a quiet but steady literary force since 1983, with many first discovering him around his 2001 novel, Erasure, a biting satire of the publishing world and the narrow expectations often placed on Black authors. The book was then adapted into the Oscar-winning film American Fiction, which introduced Everett's singularly sardonic voice to a wider audience. I sat with Percival recently at Christie's Auction House in Los Angeles as part of an intimate live event hosted by the Aspen Society. The Aspen Institute is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. They do a ton of good work, which you can learn about on our website. And I'm excited to share that we'll be returning to the annual Ideas Festival this summer. We went last year with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. We're also going to be coming to New York City for a live show at the Tribeca Audio Festival with none other than Sam Rockwell. It'll be on Saturday, June 14th at the SVA Theater. If you're in town and want to come, go to tribecafilm.com/talkeasy and use the code SAM and SAM for 10% off. That's tribecafilm.com/talkeasy, code SAM and SAM, SAMAND, SAM. Since the other Sam was in that dinner scene from this season of White Lotus, which is maybe my favorite moment of television in the last couple years, I have been dying to talk to him. So if you want to hear about that and all things Sam Rockwell, one of, I think, our best living actors, I hope you'll come out in New York City, Saturday, June 14th at the SVA Theater. We're going to be doing a lot more live shows this year. And so if you want to know when and where those are happening, be sure to join our mailing list. You can do that by emailing us at mail@talkeasypod.com. We've also included a link to the Tribeca Festival, our email address, etc. in the show notes of this episode. And now, here is my live conversation with Pulitzer Prize winning author, Percival Everett.
Sam, do you mind if I apologize to everyone for being late? I have no excuse except that I am absent-minded. And if I were you, I would have been gone by now. So I thank you for remaining.
I really thought you were going to pin that on me.
Do you know it was Sam's fault?
That's what I thought. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Sam.
You're up for this Aspen Literary Award, the winner of which will be announced later this month. But recently, in a profile for The New Yorker, you called awards, quote, offensive and invidious comparisons of works of art. So I thought we'd start here. How many voters were you trying to win over with that description?
Well, I always have my fingers pressed firmly against the pulse of American popular culture, which is why I wrote a novel about Dionysus. You know, it would be nice to win an award every week. It's a nice feeling. But really, when you get down to it, it doesn't do anything. It's great to have more readers, but, you know, if any award had been judged on Wednesday instead of Thursday, someone else would win. It's like participating in a blind free throw contest.
Have you done that recently?
Every week.
Every week. Okay, good. So let's talk about the book. I heard that it came to you while playing a game of tennis, which is amazing because when I'm playing tennis, I'm thinking about playing tennis.
Which is why you probably play a lot better than I do.
In between volleying, how did this book first appear to you?
Well, I mean, there wasn't much of an appearance. I hit a ball wildly out of the court, and my first thought was, I wonder if anyone has told the story of Huck Finn through James, which only explained my shot. And then later I started doing a little research and found out no one had. So.
In the Paris Review, you said, I'm not a natural storyteller. I start with something that bugs me, some philosophical problem, and then I look for a way to explore it. So what was that for James?
Well, usually that's very private for me. At the basis of nearly everything
Well,
I
we're only
write,
talking in public, so I think it's okay.
is the idea of the construction of meaning, how we do that. Language, you know, people talk about the code switching in this novel. I never thought of using that term.
Do you not like that term?
No, I don't dislike it at all, but it makes it sound special when it's only being human. It's what we all do. It's not unusual. It's not exceptional. It's just how we survive in the world. So to name it seems to give it some special standing that I don't think, not that it doesn't deserve, but it misses the point of it.
So the philosophical problem that you feel
if you're going to
sharing.
force me to be really boring, it comes down to the notion of sense and reference that we see when we entertain Frege's puzzle of, for an example, how you can have the morning star, the evening star, and Venus, the planet. All three things being the same thing, but being referred to quite differently and having different contextual and import.
When you published your 2009 novel, I'm Not Sidney Poitier, you watched all of his movies over and over and over again. You did the same, I'm told, before writing James, rereading Twain's Huckleberry Finn 15 times. What happens through this immersion process? Are you trying to drive yourself mad before you start writing?
Well, that was an unforeseen side effect of it. I wanted to blur the novel. I wanted to know that world, feeling that I owed some loyalty to that world, but I didn't want to owe any loyalty to the text. I'm an admirer of Twain's prose, so I needed to remember what had happened without remembering how it was told to me. And so reading it over and over, when you repeat a word and it becomes nonsensical, it sounds, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Well, that's what happened. The sad part is that I could have read it 10 times and achieved the same effect. But I read it 15, I closed it, and I haven't looked at the text since then. So when I made my novel, anything that's in there from Twain is really only a memory of a world and not of the book itself. I never appealed to the book.
Your memory of your experience having read it 15 times.
Yes.
So
Well, I had to admit.
is that what you mean by loyalty? I'm trying to understand that. Loyalty to your memory versus loyalty to the text.
Well, loyalty to the world of that text. What happened to Jim and Huck and all of those events. And much of the novel, much of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is Jim and Huck are separated. And that, of course, gave me the window through which to tell the story. That part of the story is missing. What is Jim doing when Huck is not with him? And so, of course, in my novel, one has to wonder what Huck is doing, because Huck is not present since it's from Jim's point of view.
Well, why don't we read from a scene where we're with Jim and he's united with an instrument to start to tell his story from page 50 in the book.
For the first time in my life, I had paper and ink. I was beside myself. I found a straight stick and shaved it to a point and scratched a groove into one side of it. I put the paper on my lap, dipped my stick into the ink, and wrote the alphabet. I printed letters as I had seen them in books, slowly, clumsily. And then I wrote my first words. I wanted to be certain that they were mine and not some I had read from a book in the judge's library. I wrote, I am called Jim. I have yet to choose a name. In the religious preachings of my white captors, I am a victim of the curse of Ham. The white so-called masters cannot embrace their cruelty and greed, but must look at that lying Dominican friar for religious justification. But I will not let this condition define me. And when I let myself, my mind, drown in the fear and outrage, I will be outraged as a matter of course. But my interest is in how these marks that I am scratching on this page can mean anything at all. If they have meaning, then life can have meaning. Then I can have meaning.
How do you feel about rereading your own work?
Well, I think it's ridiculous. Readings, and I wrote it down so that other people could read it.
I sensed that when I asked you to do it. You gave me a face that went, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I get it. People like to hear.
Oh, no, I'm gonna ask you to keep doing it. So just...
No, I don't have much affection for my work when I'm done with it. I call it the Mama Bear School of Art, and that is when I'm finished with a book, I push it away, and if it can eat and survive, well, that's great, but it cannot come back to the den. My job is to move on to something else.
And my job is to stay with it. So you've written 24 novels, 6 collections of poetry, 4 collections of short stories, and 1 children's book, all of which you've rendered to be, quote, complete shit.
Well, yeah. But it's over. It's done. It's
So something being done means it's shit?
Oh, yeah. I have not satisfied myself yet.
Okay.
And
Are you being hard on yourself so that you wind your way back to the page?
I'm not that smart, no. I have this belief. I love abstract art, paintings, and I love music because it's abstract. And I really believe that I should be able to make an abstract novel. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it would look like. I've never seen one. And every time I set to work, that is what I am trying to do. And every time I finish, I haven't done it. I'm very pleased that some people like some of the books I make. And if they don't, well, that's okay. Maybe they'll like the next one. But I've yet to do the one thing that I mean to do.
I heard you say that starting a book is the equivalent to knowingly entering a bad marriage. You've written a lot of books, so does that make you a masochist or a monogamist?
That's a distinction with no difference. No matter what your friends and your loved ones say to you, you're going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be full of lots of highs and lows, and no matter what you do, it's going to end badly. Mm. That's just the way I think maybe making all art works. It sounds romantic when I say it, but it doesn't feel that way at all. You have to tear up a part of yourself to make something new. And that's the unpleasant part of it, but it's also the part of it that's thrilling and the part of it that keeps us making more work.
We talked a little bit about Mark Twain. I believe he's one of 4 figures that have shaped your sense of comedy. Is that right?
Yeah, and this is, I've sort of been able to articulate this for a long time. It's in order of importance: my father, Mark Twain, Groucho Marx, and Bullwinkle the Moose. Just to give you an idea of how cool Bullwinkle is, my father was a punster, and so I liked puns. And Bullwinkle, there was an episode of Bullwinkle and Rocky the Squirrel trying to find this little boat covered with gems. And it was the ruby yacht of Omar Khayyam. And I just love that. And I'll share with you my favorite pun of my father's, which was my mother would put newspaper on the kitchen floor, so that by the time on rainy days you got through the kitchen, your shoes were a little drier by the time you got to the nice floors. And he was standing on the newspaper, and he looked at me. I was 9. I remember this so vividly. And he said, "These are the times that dry men's souls." And I thought, that is fantastic. Yeah.
And a writer is born, just like that. You know, you are born in Fort Gordon, Georgia.
It's now Fort Eisenhower. It may well be Fort Gordon again any day now.
I'm going to leave that one there. But you're raised in Columbia, South Carolina, is that right? Inside a 4,500 square foot home that your grandfather built.
Well, not with his own hands, but yes, he was a physician.
Age 9, I'm curious, what does your father's sense of humor look and sound like throughout your childhood? You put him first on that list of Twain, Groucho, and Bullwinkle.
Well, my father was probably the gentlest person I've ever known. The kindest. I never heard him utter a mean thing about anyone, all the way through to his death. But his humor was, again, not just punning. Well, I'll give you an idea of my father. In the last years of his life was an invalid because of strokes. It was hard for him to communicate, and it was very difficult to understand what he was saying. And he was, my mother was salting his food, and I said, well, maybe salt, too much salt's not a good thing. Though probably in those years, those last years, it really didn't matter, but I was trying to be a good son. And my sister's husband said, very nicely, he repeated exactly what I had said. And my mother snapped at him and said, "I've been taking care of him for years." And my father very clearly said, "And yet I continue to live."
And you said he never said a mean thing?
No. I wasn't mean. That was quite true. But still, there he was, and I knew that he was in there.
You said that he was the most gentle person you had met?
Yeah.
And your mother?
Not so much. No, my mother was a loving, loyal mother, and could be mean. My father, that gentle man, as we were driving home from my mother's family's farm when I was maybe 10, in a meadow, there was a huge cross burning. It was a Klan rally. And it was nighttime, and there was a checkpoint where these Klansmen were stopping cars as they came by. And, this was when I was a kid. Well, we didn't have seat belts. Kids were, I probably was standing on the seat of all things, but I was in the front seat with my father, and I looked over, and in his lap, I had never seen it before. I didn't know he had it. I didn't know it was in the car. I don't know where it came from. It was a pistol. And we came to the checkpoint. He stepped in the gas, and we roared away. And luckily, no one followed us, and we didn't end up in the newspaper. But I never forgot that this person, who was so gentle and so kind to everyone, had to change his entire being to protect his family. And when I say gentle, I mean it. But also, he lived in a real world.
What do you say? It's not code switching, it's being a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah. You came of age in the 60s and 70s. You were in segregated schools until you were in junior high.
That's correct.
So that's about a decade of segregation being a constant. When you went to bookstores, coming from a family of a generation of doctors, I believe, did you find yourself or your family inside the literature available to you at that bookstore or in the libraries?
Well, when I would look for contemporary novels or novels present in the bookstores I would enter, it was frustrating because it seemed that all the literature I would find was about the antebellum South or the inner city North. And none of them represented middle-class black family of doctors. So I didn't exist. But on the shelves of my grandfather and of my father, I slowly stumbled onto books of the Harlem Renaissance, which were more diverse and with a greater range of society. What I realized was the books being published at the time I was a kid, someone was making this decision that those were representative of the African American experience. Of course, the failure there is thinking that one can identify an African American experience. And this is something that my father and I would talk about a lot. The fact that from place to place, religion to religion. I grew up with a grandfather, a physician in Columbia, South Carolina, who was a raving atheist. All of his patients were Christians, and they would ask him, "Should we pray?" And he would look at him and say, "It can't hurt." So we talked about the fact that we're all as different as the world depicted of white America, and that the real racism started with this belief that we were all the same.
Your book, Erasure, which was later adapted into an Oscar-winning film called American Fiction, gets at some of the thing you're talking about in terms of what the publishing industry chooses to prioritize, which kind of stories from quote-unquote black life it deems to fit print. But you seem most interested in language here more than anything. You said recently the fact that people could even talk about black life as if that exists. The idea that a book would be about black life in America any more than a book could be about white life in America is ridiculous. Unpack that for us. What do you mean by that?
Well, a black family living in Wyoming has a completely different experience from a black family living in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. A completely different experience from a black family living in the Bronx, New York. Why? Because they live in different places. Black Muslim people have a different experience from black Christians. Socioeconomic differences make just like anyone else. The only shared experience, and this isn't just shared with other black people, the only shared experience that we can talk about with any amount of confidence is that brown people in this country, when they see blue lights in their rearview mirror, all have the same feeling. That is a shared experience.
So when you start publishing, in the 80s and into the 90s, what did you make of the industry at large, knowing that you discovered what was popular during the Harlem Renaissance, but by the time you were a kid, was no longer deemed popular? How did you situate all of that?
Well, I don't know how much I actually thought about it. I was trying to make work.
So how did you make it work?
You tell stories, and that's the thing is that you don't go to work as an artist acting as a politician. The things we believe, the politics we carry, are going to be in our work no matter what we do. I make a bet with my students all the time. I tell them to write down their 5 most profound fears. Then I tell them, if you can write a real story and I cannot find those 5 fears in it, then you get an A. You don't have to do anything else. I don't make bets I can't win. They can't do it. And if they do think that they have, they've worked so hard in this story that they've done what I wanted them to do anyway. When I started writing, to be true to my art, I had to trust that my world and my politics would follow me, not that I would follow it.
Well, I want to hold some of your politics for a moment. And to do that, I'm going to ask you kindly to read a passage from your book, Erasure.
I sat in an empty, thinly upholstered orange chair beside a young woman with curling blue fingernails. She had a little boy with a runny nose sitting on her lap. Handsome boy, I said. How old is he? 2 years, she said. I nodded. The chair was more comfortable than I expected a waiting room chair to be, and I felt the artificial pressures of my day fading away, trailing off to a whisper in that dim den of reality. So what are you doing here in Washington? Yvonne asked me from her desk. Came in for a meeting, I said. You must be important to be coming to Washington for a meeting like that, she said. I shook my head and laughed. No, it's a meeting of the Nouveau Roman Society. Hardly important. I read a paper this morning, and now I'm done. Yvonne looked at me as if the words were getting lost in the space between us. She nodded her head without looking directly at me and went back to her work on the desk. I felt awkward, out of place, like I had so much of my life felt, feeling like I didn't belong. You write books, the woman with the child asked. Yes. What kind of books you write? I write novels, I said. Stories. Already feeling out of place, I now didn't know how to sound relaxed. My cousin gave me Their Eyes Were Watching God. She had it in a class. She goes to UDC. I liked that book. That's a really fine novel, I said. She gave me Cain, too, the young woman said, adjusting her son on her lap. That's one of my favorites. Great book. It ain't a novel, though, is it? She asked. I mean, it ain't just one story, and it's got poems in it. But it seemed like one thing. Know what I mean? I know exactly what you mean. I think about that story, Box Seat, and I think I'm in that theater all the time, watching them midgets fight. She shook her head as if to come back around, wiped her child's nose. Have you gone to college? I asked. The girl laughed. Don't laugh, I said. I think you're really smart. You should at least try. I didn't finish high school. I didn't know what to say. I scratched my head and looked at the other faces in the room. I felt an inch tall because I had expected this young woman with the blue fingernails to be a certain way, to be slow and stupid, but she was neither. I was the stupid one. Thank you, I said to the girl. She didn't respond to that and luckily was called back to the examination room at that moment.
Is that one of those that you're okay reading?
Yeah, that one's okay. You did all right.
That part towards the end, I'm just struck by that. In terms of like the perception we have, how we enter a room, who we think is of value. Where does that land with you reading it now?
Oh, it's a lesson I learned on a ranch, actually, about not assuming anything about anyone. In the same way that I wouldn't want anyone assuming something about me. I got a job on this ranch. This one was actually in Montana. There was a man on the ranch, and the people around said that he didn't know his numbers. Was how it was put to me. It was in a way they were telling me that he was challenged, and we went out, 3 of us in a truck, to count cows on BLM land. That's not Black Lives Matter. That's Bureau of Land Management. And we went out and we were to cover different areas and meet back at the creek. And the foreman who was with us said to the, and I can't remember the man's name, said to the challenged man, supposedly challenged, when you see a cow, use your thumbnail and make a mark on your saddle. And he said, okay. And we rode off. And we came back after our counts, and we met. And on the man's saddle, there were, in fact, marks. But then there were these spirals. And the foreman said, well, Eddie, what are those? He said, well, them's bunches. So the count really wasn't going to be good. So we just, okay, we'll just come back and collect these cows tomorrow. And we did. We came back, we rounded up the cattle, we set up the pen, and they drove them into the trucks. And as we were standing there, Eddie, I just named him, looked to me and to the foreman and said, "There are 3 missing." He knew what a bunch was. He also was able to add our counts, tally them, and add them to his in his head. He was remarkable, and that was a huge lesson for me. I never forgot it.
We'll be right back with Pulitzer Prize winning author Percival Everett. So, taking us back into the classroom, you've been teaching for a long time. How do you hold, I don't know, that kind of like curiosity and that openness with students as kids have increasingly decided that they, how do I say it, don't read? Every week in New York Times, the New York, etc., there are articles written about how professors will not assign whole books anymore.
Well, that's a shame, and I think that it's probably true, and people read differently now. I'm surprised at just how accelerated the run from books became after COVID. I have teenage kids, and COVID hit when they were, still in middle school and the beginning of high school, and all of a sudden everything was on a screen. When COVID ended, that persisted. The weird and unfortunate thing was, because it's much easier to grade assignments on screens, they had twice as much homework, which was not helpful. But also, they were reading snippets, chapters, instead of, as you say, entire books. So that is true, that is happening. I feel very fortunate that my kids, they maintained a love of books, but I have seen that they're less likely to finish books that they begin than they were before.
Are they more cautious about language?
My kids are not cautious about language at all. No, and I don't think there's a lot of second order thinking about language right at that age. It's either the enjoyment of access to information or just the enjoyment of the story.
You show kids that you do a class on westerns, and you show the film Blazing Saddles. How does it play now in 2025?
Before I talk about Blazing Saddles, this is the first time I've taught this. I'm teaching it this semester. Not one of them has ever seen a western. In fact, the other day we were watching John Ford's Fort Apache, in which Henry Fonda plays a Custer figure, and none of them knew who George Armstrong Custer is. And it reminded me, I taught this course at the Sorbonne in Paris to 27, 24-year-old French women who had never seen a Western. And it was the same thing. I had to explain every code to them, that nearly every film they see has been based on the structure of the Western. But the tropes of the Western are lost on them, and they're catching up again.
And is the comedy of Blazing Saddles lost on them?
A little bit. Blazing Saddles is so much smarter about race than anything we have now.
Why do you think that is?
It was written by Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor, and both of them were, famously lacking in filter, and things would just pour out unchecked. The joking about race in it is just that, and there's a lot of joking back and forth, and it's very relaxed. When I started doing this 20 years ago, even then, I'm the only one in my department who can teach Blazing Saddles. My white colleagues are afraid to do it, and I get it. My students, mostly white at USC, look at me and they are looking for permission to laugh. They hear the word nigger one time and they become terrified. And I tell them, you're not saying it. It's okay. It's a context. It's a 6-letter word. Don't be afraid of it. Understand it. There was an edition of, at least there was talk of an edition of Huck Finn where they replaced the word nigger with N-word. N-word Jim. Now, if I'm out in the world and there is somebody who will use that word, you know what I would like to know? That they will use that word, because I know where I stand. I don't need to think that people are hiding this. I never thought and I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about politics. I never thought that I would long for the intellectuals of the Bush administration. But I do. For a while, even the worst racists in America, the Jesse Helms and the Strom Thurmonds, knew enough to know that their politics was shameful, and they would attempt to, if not change, to try to appear as if they were changing. Then all of a sudden, racists got their swagger back, and so it has changed. In 1989, I was invited to the South Carolina State House to address the South Carolina State Legislature on the arts. It was a very easy yes for me because I knew I wasn't going to have to write anything. I showed up on time. I'm sorry. And
I must have not been with you.
yes, and I stood there after the governor introduced me, and I said, I can't talk to you because in this room is a symbol of exclusion that will not let my words matter. On top of this building flies a symbol of exclusion that will not let my words matter, and I sat down. That was the Confederate flag I was referring to. There was a kind of a brouhaha, and I found it easy to do because I was getting on a plane the next day. But a lot of people in the state took up the issue, and they got the flag removed after years of protest. Now, as an American, I think I was wrong. I think the flag ought to be there. And it ought to be there for the same reason that I appreciate a big sign at the edge of a minefield that says mines.
It's funny, like, everyone who teaches, I hear the same complaints, and speaking of signs, about trigger warnings and things that one can and cannot say. And it strikes me that your writing, you said Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor were unfiltered, but I think your work often reads and feels that way at its best. I know you don't do well with compliments, but it does. So I want to end on your work for a second. You said recently that the only reason I come to this art form is because I'm interested in playing with how meaning gets constructed. Now, not to be dim, but what does that mean?
At the basis of my interest in meaning and my interest in language, and so my interest in literature, in making something that has meaning, is a really basic tenet of logic. I started out my studies in college as a logician. I studied mathematical logic. That's how I think about the world. And it has nothing to do with cultural identity or racial identity or even personal identity, but the idea of logical identity gives me a headache. That A equals A is not the same thing as A is enough to make me stop talking. That's where I start. And then it starts to build as I think about what is reality and what equals reality. What is meaning and what equals meaning. And so that's where I start with the idea of story. Then there are things that bug me in the world.
Like,
I don't talk about them. It's private to me. Oftentimes, my novels are doing work for me that I don't expect anyone to see.
although you have said in just about every interview around this book that one of the reasons you wrote James in the way that you did is because you found 12 Years a Slave to be particularly frustrating.
Yeah, but that's not really why I wrote the book. That just happens to be true. I'll go ahead and say why it's frustrating, but it has to do with language. In that film, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Steve McQueen directs this story, a memoir of a black man who was kidnapped from the North before the Civil War, and this did happen, and he's taken to the South and sold into slavery. It's not a bad film. It's a bit fantastical. His ideal life, living in Vermont, eating crumpets and drinking tea with his white neighbors. But he's taken south, sold, and he's put into quarters with enslaved people. And something happens that is just not possible. He has not been enculturated with the people with whom he is put. He has not grown up with them, but he understands what they are saying to each other. Enslaved people were as complex as anyone else. And one of the things that we as human beings do, complex human beings, is we find ways to talk to each other that will not allow entry of our oppressors and enemies. They would have found a way. Who knows what it would have sounded like? In James, I use standard English. But who knows what it would have sounded like? But it would have been theirs. A language that would allow them to speak about the things that human beings talk about. Their hopes, their worries, their fears. The depiction of the enslaved people that we get in our culture throughout the 19th and 20th centuries were of superstitious, simple-minded people capable of eating, drinking, and procreating. But that's not true. They thought about the stars. They thought about religion in ways that were more complex than mere fear or desire for an afterlife. And that's what's missing, is a true representation of complex people. And so that's where my complaint about that film comes in. But that really is just a part of the construction of the novel, not at the base.
Well, in the interest of leaning into complexity in 2025, why don't we read from chapter 15 of James?
I read and read, but I found what I needed was to write. I needed that pencil. I could not keep track of my thoughts. I could not follow my own reasoning after a while. This was because I couldn't stop reading long enough to make space in my head. I was like a man who had not eaten for a season and then gorged himself until sick. I appreciated Voltaire's notion of tolerance regarding religious difference, and I understood, as absorbed as I was, that I was not interested in the content of the work, but its structure, the movement of it, the calling out of logical fallacies. And so, after these books, the Bible itself was the least interesting of all. I could not enter it and did not want to enter it, and then understood that I recognized it as a tool of my enemy. I chose the word enemy and still do, as oppressor necessarily supposes a victim.
That part right there, I was not interested in the content of the work, but its structure, the movement of it, the calling out of logical fallacies.
Do you know what the Shakers were? They were a religious group who sort of condemned themselves to obsolescence by deciding they would not procreate, and so there are no Shakers left. But it's every force evolves a form. Every story generates a structure that makes meaning for it and for the story, which is why my works don't look the same one to the next.
My last question, in the interest of meaning, you said this thing about yourself that has just stuck with me all week in preparation. You said recently that your head which is where you live when you write, is a bad neighborhood,
Oh, yeah.
and I do not like being in there.
Well, apparently I do like being in there, but, but still, it's a bad neighborhood.
What are the defining features of a bad neighborhood for Percival Everett?
No.
And why, if it is so bad and is so difficult, how and why do you keep coming back to it?
Well, like most bad neighborhoods, that's where most of the interesting people live. There are caves there. If for it to be a bad neighborhood, it has to have, like any really good bad neighborhood, it has to have things that are seductive. And so those might be seen as good things, but there's certainly things that pull me in so that I can be near the bad things. One can't be too literal about these things, but I did fall in love with caves for quite a while. And I found myself going into developed and undeveloped caves all over the U.S. until a friend of mine, when I said, I don't know why I keep going into caves with my stupid lighted helmet and all that stuff. And he, sort of slapped me and said, you're working on a novel. And he was right. As is my custom, turned out that I didn't have to go into any caves to write that novel. There is one cave in it, but I did all this research. But what I learned was something that was not only crucial to that novel, but to my understanding of why I make art anyway. And that is, caves are scary to us in the abstract. They're dark. There's something in there. We don't know what's in there. Monsters are in caves, snakes, bats. And when you start going into caves, they're unknown. And as you get deeper, you keep looking back and you can see the light of the opening. And that's kind of your safety. Well, if the shit goes bad, that's where I'm going. And then something happens. You get deep enough into the cave and you make friends with it. And you don't look at the entrance, the lighted part, as the place that you want to turn to. It's always, I want to go deeper. And it's that, I call it this area of interstitial tension. And that's where art lives. When you hit that, not wall, but that space where everything turns around, is where I have to be to make the next one.
Well, I thank you for living in the interstitial for as long as you have. And it's meant the world that you showed up here today. Late and all, I think it's still on me. And thank you for the book.
Thank you, Sam.
And that's our show. If you enjoyed today's conversation with Percival Everett, be sure to leave us 5 stars on Spotify, share the program on social media, share it with a friend, review it on Apple, all of this, any of this. I say it every week, but it really does help us make this program each and every Sunday. I want to give a special thanks this week to the teams at the Aspen Society and Doubleday, and of course, our guest, Percival Everett. His Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, James, can now be found wherever you do your reading. For more talks with other great writers, I'd recommend Jennifer Egan, Ta-Nehisi Coates, George Saunders, Zadie Smith, Margaret Atwood, George Saunders again. He's come on twice. We've really had on so many fantastic writers. You can find all of those and more at talkeasypod.com. If you want to listen to more Lemonada podcasts, listen on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. You can also subscribe to Lemonada Premium for bonus content. Just hit the subscribe button on Apple or head to lemonadapremium.com. Talk Easy is produced by Caroline Reebok. Our executive producer is Janixa Bravo. Today's talk was edited by Adam Jamal and Matt Sasaki and mixed by Andrew Vastola. Our music is by Dylan Peck. Illustrations, Chris Shanoi. This episode was made in partnership with the good people at Lemonada Media, and I'm Sam Fragoso. Thank you for listening to Talk Easy. I'll see you back here on Wednesday for a very special bonus episode. Until then, stay safe and so long.